They told you this is what love looks like. They told you obedience is respect, silence is maturity, and sacrifice is proof that you care. So you believed them. You stayed quiet when something felt wrong. You ignored that voice inside you that kept whispering, "This doesn't feel like love. This feels like control." Because how do you question the very people who raised you? How do you doubt the hands that fed you, the voices that shaped you? So you don't. You adjust, you shrink, you become exactly who they need you to be, while slowly losing who you truly are. And the most dangerous part? No one sees it. From the outside, it looks like a good family, respectful child, caring parents. Everything seems perfect. But behind closed doors, your choices are not yours. Your voice feels borrowed. Your life feels managed. And one day you wake up with a question that hits deeper than anything you've ever felt. If this is love, then why do I feel trapped? At first, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like care, like someone watching over you, guiding you, making sure you don't fall. You're told what's best for you, what's safe, what's acceptable, and because it comes from people who are supposed to love you, you accept it without question. You assume this is what love is supposed to feel like, structured, firm, always certain, but slowly something begins to shift. What once felt like guidance starts to feel like pressure. It shows up in small ways. The choices you make are never fully yours. There's always a correction, a suggestion that doesn't feel like a suggestion, a reminder that they know better. You start hesitating before speaking, before deciding, before even dreaming. Not because you can't think for yourself, but because you've been trained to second guess everything you feel. And without realizing it, you begin to filter your own thoughts through their expectations. Over time, that constant pressure begins to take something from you. You don't notice it all at once. It's too subtle for that. But you start feeling tired in ways you can't explain, not physically, but emotionally, like you're carrying a weight that no one else can see. You try to be the version of yourself that keeps everything calm, that avoids conflict, that earns approval. And in doing so, you slowly move further away from who you really are. What makes it even harder is that this kind of control rarely looks harsh. It often comes wrapped in concern. I just want what's best for you. I'm doing this because I care. And maybe part of that is true. But real care doesn't make you feel small. It doesn't make you feel like your voice is less important or that your desires are something to be corrected. Real care gives you space to grow, to think, to become, not just to obey. You might even find yourself defending it, telling yourself it's normal, that other people have it worse, that you should be grateful. And that's where it becomes even more complicated because now you're not just dealing with control, you're questioning your own feelings about it. You start wondering if you're the problem, if you're too sensitive, too ungrateful, too difficult, but deep down, there's still that quiet voice reminding you that something isn't right. And that voice matters because love, in its truest form, doesn't suffocate. It doesn't leave you feeling trapped inside your own life. It doesn't demand that you shrink just to keep the peace. Love is supposed to support you, not silence you. It's supposed to guide you without taking away your ability to choose your own path. The moment you begin to recognize that difference is the moment everything starts to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a light turning on in a room you didn't realize was dark. You begin to see things for what they are, not just what they were told to be. And that awareness, that quiet realization, is where your strength begins. It often begins with a sentence that sounds harmless, even comforting. I'm just trying to protect you. And for a long time, you believe it without question because protection is supposed to feel safe. It's supposed to feel like someone is standing between you and harm. But over time, that protection starts to feel less like safety and more like restriction. You notice that your world is smaller than it should be, your choices are limited, your independence delayed, your confidence quietly held back. Every time you try to step forward, there's a warning waiting for you. Every time you express a desire to do something on your own, there's a reason why you shouldn't. It's always framed as concern, always wrapped in the language of care, but the result is the same. You stay where you are. At some point, you stop asking for permission because you already know the answer. You begin to anticipate their reactions before you even make a move, and slowly, you adjust your behavior to avoid conflict. Not because you agree, but because it's easier than constantly having to defend your right to grow. This is how control becomes internal. It's no longer something imposed on you. It becomes something you carry within yourself. What makes this even more difficult to recognize is that it doesn't feel aggressive. There's no obvious force, no loud demands. It's quiet, consistent, and persistent. It shows up in questions that feel more like interrogations, in advice that feels more like instructions. You're told what's safe, what's appropriate, what's right for someone like you, and over time, those definitions begin to replace your own. You start doubting your instincts. Even when you feel ready, you hesitate. Even when you know what you want, you question it because somewhere along the way, you were made to believe that your judgment isn't enough, that you need someone else to guide every step, approve every decision, validate every direction, and that belief can quietly shape your entire life. But real protection doesn't work like that. It doesn't keep you small to keep you safe. It doesn't limit your growth in the name of care. True protection prepares you for the world. It doesn't hide you from it. It teaches you how to stand on your own, how to think, how to choose, how to handle both success and failure. It doesn't remove your freedom, it strengthens it. There comes a moment, though, when you begin to see the difference, when you realize that what you thought was safety has actually been holding you back. And it's not an easy realization because it challenges everything you've been taught to believe. It forces you to question the very foundation of your upbringing, but it also opens the door to something you may have never fully experienced before: trust in yourself. And that trust changes everything. Because once you begin to rely on your own judgment, your own voice, your own sense of direction, the grip of that control starts to loosen. Not because the external pressure disappears, but because internally something shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs constant protection and start seeing yourself as someone capable of living, deciding, and growing on your own terms. It rarely begins with something obvious. There's no single moment where everything changes. Instead, it happens quietly, through small interactions that seem insignificant on their own. A comment that makes you question yourself, a reaction that makes you feel like your emotions are too much, a pattern where your efforts are noticed but never truly valued. And at first, you brush it off. You tell yourself it's nothing. But over time, those moments begin to collect. They settle somewhere deep inside you, shaping the way you see yourself. You start becoming more careful about what you say, how you act, even how you feel. You begin to measure your worth through their reactions. If they approve, you feel okay. If they don't, you feel like you've done something wrong. And slowly, without realizing it, your sense of self begins to depend on something outside of you. You might find yourself trying harder, doing more, being more, not because it fulfills you, but because you're searching for that moment of validation that never fully comes. And when it doesn't, you don't question the system. You question yourself. You wonder if you're not enough, if you're missing something, if you need to change just a little more to finally be accepted. This is where the real damage begins, not in what is said, but in what is believed. Because once you start believing that your voice is less important, that your feelings are too much, that your presence needs to be adjusted to fit someone else's expectations, you begin to disappear in your own life. You hold back your thoughts, you silence your opinions, you choose comfort over honesty, not because you want to, but because it feels safer. And the strange part is, from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You might seem calm, respectful, well-behaved. You've learned how to navigate the environment, how to avoid tension, how to keep things stable. But inside, there's a quiet struggle, a feeling that you're not fully seen, not fully heard, not fully allowed to just be. At some point, you may even forget what your natural voice sounds like. Decisions become difficult because you're used to looking for approval first. Confidence feels distant because it was never allowed to grow freely. You hesitate, even in situations where you should feel certain, and that hesitation becomes a habit. But here's the truth that often takes time to accept. Your worth was never meant to be something you earned through silence or compliance. It was never supposed to depend on how well you fit into someone else's expectations. You were meant to exist fully, to express freely, to take up space without constantly questioning whether you deserve to. The moment you begin to reconnect with that truth, something inside you starts to shift. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet and steady, but powerful. You begin to notice your thoughts again. You start listening to your feelings instead of dismissing them. You slowly allow yourself to exist without constant self-correction. And in that process, you start rebuilding something that was never meant to be broken: your sense of self, not based on approval, not shaped by fear, but rooted in your own understanding of who you are. And once that foundation begins to form, it becomes much harder for anyone to quietly take it away from you again. It doesn't always come as pressure or control. Sometimes it comes as a feeling you can't quite escape, a quiet weight that sits on your chest every time you try to choose yourself. You start to notice it when you say no, when you try to set a boundary, or even when you think about doing something that makes you happy but doesn't align with what's expected of you. That feeling has a voice, and it sounds familiar. It reminds you of everything that's been done for you, everything you've been given, everything you owe. At first, it feels justified. You tell yourself it's only fair to consider them, to prioritize their feelings, to not disappoint them. After all, they've sacrificed so much, right? That's the narrative that plays over and over in your mind. And so you adjust your choices, not because they feel right to you, but because you're trying to avoid that heavy sense of guilt that follows whenever you don't. Over time, this feeling becomes automatic. You don't even need to be told anymore. The moment you think about doing something for yourself, the guilt arrives before the action does. It questions you, it challenges you, it makes you feel like choosing your own path is somehow selfish, and so you hesitate, you pull back, you convince yourself that your needs can wait, that your happiness is something you'll get to later. What makes this even more complex is that guilt in its natural form isn't a bad thing. It's meant to guide us when we've done something wrong, to help us stay connected to our values. But when it's used repeatedly in a way that makes you feel responsible for other people's emotions, it stops being guidance and starts becoming control. It keeps you in a position where you're constantly prioritizing others at the expense of yourself. You might find yourself explaining your decisions over and over, trying to soften the impact, trying to make it easier for them to accept. You carry the emotional burden, not just of your own life, but of their reactions to it. And in doing so, you slowly lose the ability to choose freely because every decision comes with a cost, not external, but internal. The hardest part is realizing that this pattern has shaped the way you think. You begin to believe that your role is to keep others comfortable, even if it means staying uncomfortable yourself. You measure your goodness by how much you give up, how much you tolerate, how much you suppress, and that belief can keep you stuck for years, even when you know deep down that something needs to change. But here's where the shift begins, when you start to question that guilt instead of immediately obeying it. When you pause and ask yourself, is this truly mine to carry? You begin to see that not every feeling of guilt is a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just a sign that you're doing something different, something new, something that challenges what you were taught. And that realization is powerful because once you understand that you are allowed to make choices without constantly feeling guilty, you begin to reclaim a part of yourself that was buried under obligation. You start to see that caring about others doesn't require you to abandon yourself. That respect doesn't mean silence. That love doesn't mean losing your freedom. It's not an easy process. That feeling doesn't disappear overnight. It may still show up, still whisper those same old reminders, but now you see it for what it is, not a command, but a habit. And the more you choose to listen to yourself instead of that voice, the weaker it becomes, until one day it no longer controls you at all. There comes a moment when something inside you refuses to stay quiet any longer. It's not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet realization that you can't keep living the same way. You start to feel it in the way you react, in the way certain words affect you, in the exhaustion that doesn't go away no matter how much you try to keep everything balanced. And slowly, you begin to understand that the change you've been waiting for has to start with you. At first, the idea of doing things differently feels uncomfortable. You've spent so much time adjusting, explaining, and trying to maintain peace that choosing yourself almost feels unnatural. You hesitate before speaking up. You question whether you're doing the right thing. There's a part of you that still fears the reaction, the disappointment, the shift in dynamics. But even with that fear, there's also a growing sense that staying the same is no longer an option. So you begin in small ways. You allow yourself to have an opinion without immediately justifying it. You make a decision without asking for approval. You start noticing when something doesn't feel right, and instead of ignoring it, you sit with it. These moments might seem small from the outside, but internally, they are significant. They are the first steps toward reclaiming something that was slowly taken from you, your sense of ownership over your own life. You also begin to understand that creating space doesn't always mean creating distance. It means changing the way you engage. It means recognizing where your responsibility ends and someone else's begins. You stop carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. You stop trying to fix reactions that you didn't create. And in doing so, you start to feel lighter, not because everything around you has changed, but because something within you has. There will be moments when it feels difficult, when old patterns try to pull you back, when that familiar pressure returns, asking you to go back to what feels comfortable, even if it wasn't healthy. And in those moments, the real work begins, not in proving anything to others, but in staying consistent with yourself, in reminding yourself why you started, in choosing again and again not to abandon your own voice. What's important to understand is that this process isn't about becoming distant or cold. It's not about rejecting the people in your life. It's about redefining your place within it. It's about learning that you can care deeply and still have limits, that you can respect others without losing respect for yourself, that you can love without giving up your identity. And over time, something shifts. You begin to feel more grounded, more certain, more present in your own decisions. The fear doesn't control you the way it used to. The need for constant approval starts to fade. You begin to trust yourself, not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to move forward without constantly looking back. This is where your strength reveals itself, not in loud declarations or sudden changes, but in quiet consistency, in the way you choose yourself without needing validation, in the way you stand firm without needing to explain every step, and most importantly, in the way you no longer feel the need to shrink just to keep everything around you comfortable. Because in the end, this isn't about breaking away from others. It's about finally coming back to yourself.